I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight. This is our second exhibition of 2017. We hosted the Prairie Lakes grant recipients in January. There's a certain joy for this particular artist for me. Our artist tonight is Anna Biedenbender, and I think I have a unique relationship with her because when she was in possibly 5th grade, she came to the Young Michelangelo Art Camp here at Bethany. And she had a career here as a young Michelangelo artist, which I thought was very great. Then she went on to Wisconsin Lutheran College. I think she wanted to get further away from home. You know, I don't think it was an art decision, so it was, at least that's what I think. I was aware of her work at WLC, though. I did see the student show there, and I did run into her randomly during her time there. And then 2 springs ago, we were both at the Art World at St. John's in Northeast Minneapolis, so I had a chance to update, to see her work as a graduate student, and now after graduate school. So I've kind of been following her work, although I don't consider myself a stalker. I'm sure she'll give you more details. Please welcome Anna Biedenbender.
I'm not a stalker, don't worry. Well, hello everybody. Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Does this work? Okay. Thank you so much for coming to Bethany tonight. You students that are out there, thank you for coming even if it was required. Family and friends who traveled to get here, and new friends that I'm just meeting tonight. I'm very excited to show some new work in this show entitled Priska. Thank you so much to Bill for giving me this opportunity to show and putting all this together, as well as Sue Harstad and Leah Kurth. I think at least I saw Sue out there. And of course, anyone that I'm not aware of, or I don't know your name, or that had anything to do with the show, just thank you very much. I'm very appreciative. I apologize for reading straight from this sheet of paper, but as I think you can see by the thickly marked up work around here, there's always quite a bit going through my head, and so I wanted to be sure that I say everything I wanted to say tonight. Here's a proper introduction for you. My name is Anna Leigh Biedenbender, like Bill said, and I'm an artist currently based in the Twin Cities. I have a studio that I share with 2 other artists in the Northrop King building in Northeast Minneapolis, and that's known to be one of the bigger art districts up in the cities, for those of you who don't know. I received a BA in art from Wisconsin Lutheran College in Milwaukee in 2014, and an MFA in visual studies with an emphasis in painting and drawing from the Minneapolis College of Art and Design this past May 2016. For any who are curious and my mother concerned with my income, I am also the worship coordinator and office manager at Mount Olive Lutheran Church in St. Paul. So I split my time between the studio and church. Practical detail for all you students, it's just under 30 hours a week for my church job, and then the rest of the time I get to spend in the studio. So it's actually pretty flexible, so I get to decide what days I work. I work Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays at church during business hours, and then Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I get to have time at the studio or go to art events and all that. So I'm pretty blessed to have a flexible schedule like that. If you can find a job like that, that's awesome. A quick overview of my practice and what it's about. I'm a figurative artist and am interested in the human condition, which is the characteristics, key events, and situations which compose the essentials of human existence, such as birth, growth, emotionality, aspiration, conflict, and mortality. And I don't cover all of those, but I do question and struggle with our ability, or even failure, as people to be vulnerable and empathetic with each other. I believe vulnerability is an inescapable characteristic of being human, and having empathy is recognizing that vulnerability in others. As flawed human beings, these are difficult tasks, But as a Christian, I believe that it's part of Jesus' command to love one another. And so I want to do this in my work, recognize that vulnerability in others, practice empathy, and then show my own vulnerability as well. But let me back up before I go any further. I'd like to show you how I got to the point in my practice where I'm making work like what you see in here. I've never been an artist who can just draw something from their head. I can't create awesome cartoons or comic book pages like the ones Bill introduced to me at the Michelangelo Art Camp, like he said. I'm not really what you call a doodler. I actually don't even keep a sketchbook. And I know all you students are just flabbergasted right now. I've always had to look at something in order to create, and this is very much in line with who I am and how I function. I'm reactive, not proactive. And because of this, up until about a year ago, I created work that was similar to this piece, one I created in college. It came directly from looking at this photo, and personally, I don't think it's as impressive when you see my reference, considering they look exactly the same. And I know you all thought it was a masterpiece before you saw that reference. However, what I think is visible in this work, or at least shows the beginnings of it, is this love of people, reading their actions and trying to understand what they're thinking. The figure and the contours of a body, and a love of mark and paint. This is what I did for a long time, and I'm sorry I could not find the reference photo for this one. It also looks exactly the same as the painting, just like the previous slide. But I did this for a long time, essentially copying these references to create a work. And don't get me wrong, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially if you're the one taking the reference photos. But all in all, it just wasn't the kind of work that I really wanted to be making and that I knew that I could make. So when I went to grad school, my goal was to work on how I could visually portray the vulnerability and empathy I was trying to communicate conceptually in my work. Well, this is tough when all you want to do is control what you're doing. So especially as an artist that copies photos and isn't a doodler, I mean, I might as well just plug these photos into that app where you can like decide what kind of painting it looks like. I mean, I think it's practically the same thing. So what I first had to do was learn how to let go. And that's vague, I know, let go. But what I mean is for me to be able to create a piece without being a slave to a photograph, like I was in these pieces. I should be able to create from outside of what I see in a reference. While in school, I was encouraged to try different techniques when I was looking at a reference. Don't just use depiction, but omission, alteration, repetition, improvisation. I needed to embrace that reactionary characteristic of mine. So I began by drawing one image over another. What I was drawing was still very much representational, almost exactly again what I was seeing in my photos, but now with this layering, my gestural marks became their own characters. They got all jumbled together, and I couldn't find where I'd left off drawing the previous layer, and that led to a misplacement, or later I'd call it an intentional displacement of those marks. And those gestural marks that came from attempting, and I say attempting, mind you, these techniques in painting, the omission, alteration, repetition, improvisation, that led to a kind of dissolving of the figures I was depicting. Meaning, I embraced that displacement of a representational mark. I would look at the arm here, and instead of attaching it to the shoulder, I'd move it over to the bottom left of the panel and put the arm there instead. I'd also change up the size of and repeat marks, resulting in paintings that you see here. Eventually, the figure was dissolved into almost complete abstraction, but it was still very much present. It might be kind of light on here, but for instance, can you still hear me? On this one, on the very top, there's pencil marks. You might not be able to see it, but it's this vague outline of shoulders and heads on two different people, and they look like they're talking to each other, or they're sitting by each other. You can come up and I'll show you on the computer. Maybe it'll be easier to see later. But so the figure was still very much there in the work. And once I got to this point, I cannot tell you how freeing it was. You need a mark. Doesn't have to be a part of an arm or an eye. It can just be a mark, and that's okay. And I probably sound ridiculous, and like I don't know the first thing about art or about painting, but really I don't think that I did. I could paint, but I didn't understand what painting really was. So particularly for my work and what I wanted to say, there really needed to be an inclusion and consideration of how I made the work and its connection to what I was making and saying. If I really wanted to talk about the vulnerability of other people, I had to show that vulnerability myself in how I made the work. And eventually, this was the result. So, if you could humor me for a second while I read some more, I'm reading already, but read some of my artist statement, and sorry to any overachievers that read it, it's in the back already. But here's what I say. As a commitment to this vulnerability, I create the work through a process that also mimics that vulnerability. I dissolve figure-ground relationships into compositions of gestural line and mark, which from the images you've seen kind of, see, this is why I write things down, I can't come up with words. You've seen it progress throughout the images. These compositions fluctuate between figuration and abstraction. Marks are created through trial and error, and I allow many of the erroneous marks to remain transparent in the final piece, again maintaining an open process. And sorry if you can hear me one more time, but like here, there's a little white line just beyond his back there, and that was supposed to be this man's elbow that was leaning on a ledge of some kind, but obviously it didn't pan out in making it and rendering it very completely, so it's just this white line. So that's an example of what I'm talking about. I work from multiple sources, referencing photographs, direct observation, and other renderings, all often of individuals who are unaware of my observation and capturing of them. I then combine and translate this information through painting and drawing onto a wood panel. The solidity of the surface allows me to use various tools, such as squeegees, credit cards, brushes, and my hands to place, move, and scrape away paint with a large amount of pressure. If it was canvas, for instance, it is, depending on how well you're stretching it on your bars, it's going to start to press really deep into it. It would make a big gouge in it, so wood is the way to go. I also use tape to mask certain areas and create direction for the eye to follow, implied boundaries, abstract surfaces, and texture. This process is part depiction, part improvisation, and part alteration, heavily relying on chance and reaction. So the work hovers between clarity and obscurity. So you can see there's a person up there, but it's very much a painting. There's a lot of marks on there. That's what I'm getting at anyway. Here is another example of a more recent work. In this piece, there isn't really any indication of a physical environment around this boy, which about 2 years ago would have totally freaked me out as a student. Figure can be in psychological space. How does that work? But there's hints of recognizable elements. An arched window to the left of him, a masked off line underneath him that becomes an invisible seat. Right here, see that blue coming through? And, lost my place, sorry. And another masked line that becomes the surface for his arm to rest on. So just above him, that one's a little more visible. And then here's one of the works from this show. You can feel free to look at that one or that one, if you can see it. I do a similar thing with these masked off lines created with the tape. The one gives her a surface to work with her hands on. So this right here, comes all the way across through there. Another masked line becomes the back of a chair for her. Sorry, it's really inconvenient. Right there. And the other creates that angle for your eye to move down and seems to hold off or push over all the marks to one side. So it's that very clear one on the left where everything is over to the right side of the painting. And along with, I keep talking about the tape and the masked off areas, but I also mentioned they use squeegees. So there's this large mark, I'll point to it in a second. It's very blue, I use it with a large squeegee and it becomes the rest of her clothing. And that's right here. It's just one big mark. And again, I can't tell you how, I'm totally going off book right now. I can't tell you how crazy that was for me as a painter to understand that one mark could become a recognizable thing. Like that, I just could not comprehend that in my brain. So to get to that point, for me, that's amazing. All of you students are probably like, yeah, we know this already. Okay, and let's see, also in this piece, you can also see smaller marks through those masked off lines. And just behind her, the last thing I'll do is, I promise, these in here, and you can look at it later, obviously. But these come from an attempt at, for this one, at least 2 other paintings on this particular panel underneath that. And this happens quite often for me. I'll start a number of different paintings on the same panel, and for various reasons, it just won't work. But I'll keep painting on top of it because I think that all those marks will eventually contribute to whatever the final work ends up being. I think it gives it depth and texture and interesting detail, and again, it adds to that open process, that vulnerability that I want to show in my work. Most of my work's themes come from my background in Christianity and conservative Lutheran church. You see some of that in this one, like I said, the arched window, or you can kind of see the arch behind this man. The yellow lines in front of him are pews. He's sitting in pews, so that one yellow line indicates that. In this one also, she's also in between pews, and near the bottom, only you guys right in front of it might be able to see it, but on the bottom there's these red and black rectangles that are actually hymnals and Bibles. So this is a big thing for me. I've grown up my entire life with a not very good ability to ask questions because of this Lutheranism. Who are we kidding? Martin Luther asked the most essential question, right? Of what does this mean? He always answered it, which became really difficult for me. You know, if you have a question that always has an answer, it's hard to ask a question yourself. And I'm sorry for any non-Lutherans that are out there. We're in Minnesota, so I'm sure there's a Lutheran somewhere nearby. You can ask them about this. But in all honesty, this disrupted ability to ask questions without immediately having an answer, it kind of messes with a painter's head, especially when a painting is meant to be a question, not an answer. And I really think that my paintings before these, the earliest ones I showed you in the slides, those were just answers. You clearly knew what it was. You could tell how I painted within the first 2 seconds of looking at it. There was nothing there for the viewer to experience. And a painting, in my opinion, it should be the manifestation of a struggle with an idea or a thought or a question. And we probably won't figure out the answer as artists. That's probably what's going to happen. But the act of exploring the possibilities is what gives you an interesting painting. And as a viewer, it gives you an actual experience to look at. For instance, I like my works to feel like they're at the height of their search, a height of momentum, and that they're comfortable in their vulnerability, showing that I'm comfortable in being vulnerable. Because I do think that this isn't just an okay thing, but a necessary thing for us to be vulnerable with each other, knowing that we'll all be empathetic with each other too, and recognizing that we each have our own stuff, all of our things going on. I just think that's really important. So, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped this one. These were details of that taped stuff I was talking about. So I keep talking about being vulnerable. Well, here's me being vulnerable. Not only do I struggle with asking questions, like I said, but I also struggle with being both an artist and a Christian, and a woman and a Christian. I think there are some dissonant intersections between these personal identities, roles, and callings. And I think there are definitely some gray areas here, and they're bound to be gray because we live in a flawed world. That's just going to happen. So I believe that gray requires vulnerability in oneself and empathy for everyone around you. And this is why I focus on these concepts. I'm trying to find my place as an artist, a woman, and a Christian. A middle ground where I can ask questions, but also be okay with not finding an answer or even being wrong. Making art is a very personal thing. You create with your own hands, with your own ideas. You show your own struggles. You deem an idea or a theme worthy of being explored, and then you decide to put that on display for everybody else to mull over. So in these works around you, the women didn't know that I was taking photos of them. I didn't want them to, because then I wouldn't catch that openness that we sometimes let sneak through. But I still thought it was important that I spend 40 plus hours on that one moment, studying it and them, thinking about them, asking myself questions, and comparing details caught with the camera to what I'm probably missing with my own two eyes every single day. So here's more of my statement. Prisca, or Prisca spelled with a K, is the name of the woman the Apostle Paul mentioned several times in his epistles in the biblical New Testament. Prisca was a highly respected Christian in the early days of the church. Co-workers of Paul, Prisca and her husband Aquila served as evangelists and teachers. Yet while Paul uses the formal, respectful form of address, Prisca, and I've got the actual Greek on my statement, the New Testament translators opted to use Priscilla instead, the diminutive form of the name. The works you see here depict women also belonging to the church, with a capital C, women and soon-to-be women created by God to be held in respect, each one a Prisca. Within each individual piece, there's only one person. A range of emotion and action is reflected through their faces, hands, and postures. This focus on various parts of a person's physical portrayal represents the human condition, which I talked about earlier. Creating works where I can give hours of attention to a single individual and a mere moment of their life is my act of admiration for their vulnerability. In creating these works, I am acknowledging the women of our churches today, attempting to really hold, see, and understand them, or understand a few, and elevating them to the position of regard to which Paul held Prisca in his writings. Now, I've recently discovered that I get the most excited about a painting when it just looks like crap. Because I know that there's more and more potential built into each new mark that I add, whether it's good or bad, because each of those marks is a question. And that potential will eventually be molded into something that I'm proud of. For instance, this panel over here, I mean, that took 3 years to get through with however many paintings underneath it. But it could only make that painting in the end. So, like my work, I'm going to keep up my practice and life in this way too, making a bunch of mistakes, trying again, reworking, getting to know people, empathizing, trying to be vulnerable, and asking questions, because I think that's what I'm called to do. Thank you. tweet out a whole bunch of words at you, so if anyone's got any questions, or if you need a second to think it over and then ask a question. Yeah.
Could you make more specific the dissonance between being a Christian and an artist?
And an artist, yeah. So when I was in grad school, I come up with a good order for this. So I think that for me, my faith is so integral to everything I do, who I am. I was born into a Christian family, so I grew up with that my entire life, and so it's automatically intertwined with just everything I do and how I think, and so that I couldn't not that I was talking to everybody about it at grad school or anything, but I would say I couldn't do something on Sunday because I'm going to church. Like, it was just a thing. And then it was also a part of my work. So people became pretty quickly aware that I was a Christian, and the conversations that inevitably came up, and I think that this is a problem, well, not a problem, but probably a hurdle for other Christian artists, is that as soon as you start talking about your faith and Christianity involved with your work, I think that there is a fear there for the viewer that the artist is trying to preach at them, that they're not representing a question or showing a question, but that they're trying to give somebody an answer that they think is right, and they think the other person's wrong. And that was a big hurdle to get over in school, and I'm still struggling with that. I think, for instance, that I wrote my artist statement for this show in a particular way, knowing that I was at a Lutheran college, whereas I think I'm going to have an open studio once I get back up to the cities and show this work again. I'm probably going to talk about these Christian themes in an even more academic way, because I'm afraid that I'm going to come off as this like evangelist, that this is what I think is right. I think you should think it too. And I also think that some work does do that. It is trying to teach people or tell people a certain thing. I don't think that Christians can get away with that. And there's maybe other areas that can't too, but that's something I just became particularly aware of when I was in school, and still was I never was out of school. I went right from college to grad school, so I'm just starting to be an adult in real life now, so but it's still evident, so yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Yeah.
35 years ago, MCAD was very, very much of a modernist place.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see that they're pushing you toward abstraction. Are they pushing you away from, or were they actively trying to push you into abstraction wholly and get rid of the figure altogether?
Yeah, it's kind of a typical cycle I went through, isn't it? Was a figurative artist going in, and I became an abstract artist, and now I'm making my way back. Yeah, I do think that can happen, and that was definitely a discussion that was had multiple times about, well, you have to defend everything in school, right? So why are you using the figure? Why are painting people, why is that important? And that modernist idea that it's not necessary and it's stupid and it just shouldn't be done. It's still kind of there, probably because the faculty especially went through that. So it's figuring out the culture and contemporary ideas again. I think for me though, it was a necessary thing to do that letting go of. I was so tight in that earlier work, down to like I was outlining my figures. It was practically a paint and lines kind of thing, or paint by number, that's what I meant. So I think for me, it was necessary to do that cycle of going to abstract work and then coming back. And now obviously you can see it's like, it's a good, hopefully good, intermingling of the two. Anybody else? Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to talk a little bit about the difference when you were at WLC and then how you adapted to this atmosphere, maybe the anxiety, possibly. Just because some of our own students might be in a similar situation. So.
Absolutely. You probably are all a whole lot less sheltered than I am. Not, I love you, mom and dad. They're both here. You're doing it wrong. But I mean, we definitely have a different culture growing up in southern rural Minnesota than, you know, the Twin Cities. That was how it was for me. So that was, and really that was the same kind of life that I had in Milwaukee too. I started to get this sense of like a bigger art world and these bigger conversations that people were having, and how they were saying that in artwork, how that all worked. But yeah, going to the Twin Cities and going to MCAD was a big culture shock. It was a good learning experience. For the students out there, if you're confident in who you are as a person, and if you have, this is important for me, if you have faith and that is, you know, you're confident in that, you'll be fine. But you're definitely going to get introduced to just whole new perspectives on life, because you have people coming from, and you've probably gotten that here too at Bethany. I mean, people coming from different states, different areas, different backgrounds. It's just a part of meeting new people, and yeah, understanding how different people have grown up and live. I learned a lot at grad school. There's so many memories going through my mind right now. Yeah, I just learned a lot. It was a really big culture shock, but eventually you get over that and you start to feel like you're a part of that world too, or at least you found your spot in it, and then you continue to do your thing and grow. That didn't really answer your question.
Well, what I'm thinking more about is the pressure you felt to become part of that culture, based on where you were.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, what do I have to do to become an artist? You know?
Yeah. You're totally going to want to make an installation at some point, because that's what every grad student wants to do. Like the typical, you go and you make abstract work when you go to grad school. Like installations were the big thing when I was there. Yeah, can you see your question one more time in a different way? Sorry, this is why I write out my speeches. Seriously.
Okay, well, did your work ethic change? Did you feel like under pressure to create more? Were you always doing a ton of stuff and it didn't matter?
Yeah, it probably depends on your particular class that you're in, especially if you're talking about going to school. My class had a very good work ethic and almost an inhuman kind of work ethic. Our director said things like, if you're sleeping, you're not doing, you know, enough work. And I'm like, you're kidding, right? You need sleep. Sleep. Get your hours of sleep. Otherwise, you're going to make just crap work. But yeah, it's a part of being in that community too, and seeing not only seeing other people's work ethics, but seeing the kind of work they're making. And totally, you're going to feed off of each other. One of my studio mates now was my studio mate in grad school too, and we still constantly feed off of each other. I like that there's a buffer in between us. We've got a third studio mate. I like that there's a person in between. Otherwise, I think our work would be like way too similar. I think I well, I am really young, but I was really young when I went to grad school. So there was just a lot of growing, a lot of changing when I went to school. And so I was taking in all of those things that you're asking about, people's work ethics, their backgrounds, what they were saying in their work. And I think it's going to be different for each person, how they handle it, or what you see in all of that. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what it's like having a studio space in Northeast, and just tell the students, I think some of the students know what it's like, but or they say student space, space is there in Northeast, but
Right.
just like what that whole area is like, and how we like inspire the students to have art and all that.
Yeah. Yeah, Northeast Minneapolis is, it's great. They're so supportive of the arts there. I mean, you know that by being in Minnesota already, like all the grants that we have, opportunities for fellowships and things. It's just awesome. Within the Twin Cities, there's a number of galleries, and it's actually, once I got to know people, it's actually a fairly small art community. If you meet someone, they're probably going to mention, you know, like 2 different people, maybe when you're talking with them, and you'll know that you're in when they start talking about them and you know who they are. And that doesn't take too long to do, which is really nice, because then you can solidify those relationships and yeah, use like the galleries that are up there and everything. As far as having a studio, I talked about like having the flexible work hours. That's awesome. The Northrop King building it's got 4 floors, I think, of studios just all over. I don't think I even know the total. It's got to be over 300 studios in there, probably more. So it's fun to be within an environment where everybody's working, and art is important, and people are creating new things all the time. They also have events. They have First Thursdays, where it's just known throughout the area that on the first Thursday of each month that the Northrop King building is open for visitors, and if you want to have your studio open for people to come in and see your stuff, you can do that, and it's just a standing invitation, which is great. Bill talked about Art Whirl in the summer. That's the same kind of thing. It's a known event where it's just a big open studio weekend. There's also, it's Art Attack in November. It's a similar thing, just winter. Yeah, that's all I'm thinking of right now. Yeah.
How much does your studio cost?
Good question. Mine's really reasonable. We have 900 square feet, and it's $750 total. So, I'm sorry, 950 square feet. There's 50 square feet of neutral space for all of us to share. And then each of us gets 300 square feet, and then we each pay $250 for that.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, it's to have under $1 per square foot is yeah.
Talk about vulnerability, appreciating it in others, and experiencing it for yourself, but then again, and showing it in your work, but it takes a certain amount of bravado to have a public showing, right? So how do you reconcile those 2 things? It seems like a vulnerable person is the last thing you want to do, show their work.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of artists out there that don't show their work. Yeah, it's really hard the whole schmoozing part of the art world, I'm not good at because of that. I'm just a quiet person in general. So the having to go up to people and create a relationship out of thin air because one day you'd like to show them their gallery that's really difficult. Yeah, I don't know that I can reconcile it. It's a weird, I mean, it is a thing. Maybe one day artists will come up with a way to get over that. I don't know, or come up with a different way. I mean, there's this thing like about this is probably an old idea, but a white box, and, you know, is a white box really the correct place to be showing art? Because, you know, there's maybe an implication that only a higher class can go to a white box and see work, and you want to make art available to all people. So artists have come up with ways to show in different spaces, very approachable spaces, and that's one solution to that. Maybe a characteristic that's pretty common in artists, I think. Yeah.
Approximately how long did it take to finish the series of yours?
This series, well, Bill asked me in May, right after I graduated, I think. So, what was that, 10-ish months that I've been working on it? Which is probably a lot more time. It was probably less time in reality, because I do work better under pressure. So it's not working solid a month of time within that. So, but yeah, I had 10 months to at least think about what I wanted to do, and yeah. Did I see it here before? No, not anymore. Yes. Mom.
What draws you to these subjects? Like, why do you see a woman or a person and say, I want to paint that person?
I don't know. I don't know what the word is. There's something in photography, and for photographers out there, you can talk a whole lot better about this than I can, but it's something called the punctum, and if a photograph doesn't have a punctum, which is like it's got that punk, I don't know, the word just kind of sounds like what it's supposed to be. It's like this thing that like gets you, it jolts you when you see it. I don't know how to describe that for me, but I get that, like I know that there's some kind of like painting punctum in when I take an image. I'll take a round of images, like 20. I'll be talking, and I didn't say this specifically in my presentation, but when I'm talking, I'll be talking with a person, and I'll usually use my phone as my camera. So I probably look really rude, but I have my phone up, and I'm just kind of like pressing the button while I'm like talking with them, sitting there. And so I'll have like 25 photos of this person as they were talking, and they were animated about this or that, or they took a second and thought about something themselves, and if I can catch that, that's awesome. So I'll look through those photos, and there'll just be like one or two that just really stand out to me, and there's just something about how they look, or what I think that they're thinking, or what they're doing with their hands, that I think is interesting. Anyone else? Yeah.
How did impediment come with this?
Yeah, which one is that? Oh, it's this one. I was thinking about and I don't know if I painted it as well as I maybe saw in the photograph, but she was very frustrated, whatever she was working on, and it's not important, which is why I didn't show it necessarily in the painting, but she was so frustrated with whatever she was doing. And so I thought that there was some kind of impediment that was, that something is not, is not working. So that's where that word came from. It's kind of funny how close a smirk and a grimace are. It's really hard to paint. Like, you gotta make sure that it's not one or the other. So, yeah. She was frustrated.
It evokes a lot of emotion.
Good. Well, yeah. Well, I'm sorry if it's frustration. I guess that is a good thing, though. This is kind of what I want. Yeah.
When you're painting and your family and friend network is used to looking at images that are recognizable, and then you show them these, what kind of responses do you get?
You mean like if they've seen an abstract work and they come in and see this and they can recognize a figure?
It makes me think of, when I was a teenager, I took a self-portrait of myself, half in light and half in in shadow. And my grandfather looked at it and said, I wouldn't give you a nickel for that. You know, and that was only just obscuring half my face. Now what happens when you're, you know, there's some likeness, but there's also a lot more things that they're not familiar with, that they're not getting.
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with that?
Yeah. Somebody just told me before this that there was an old abstract work that they had seen of mine, and they respectfully wanted to ask if they had hung it the right direction in their house. Because that's kind of what happens with abstract work. Like, you maybe don't know what direction it's supposed to hang in. At least with a recognizable person in a painting, like, unless theirs was really doing something funky or they were doing a handstand or something, it's probably going to go a certain direction when you hang it. So yeah, I guess I'm kind of lucky that I do like to paint the figure, and so there is, and I'm drawn to a face and hands, and those are recognizable for people, and probably, you know, not everyone likes or gets the more abstract parts of the painting, which is fine, because ultimately it was just fun for me to do. Yeah, I don't know that I figured that one out yet. It just is a thing. I mean, I think by doing a talk like this, like I can start to kind of explain like what I'm thinking and why I'm doing what I'm doing, which I think helps. But certainly I think like anything, it's a learning process, and the more you look at, the more you figure out, the more you begin to know. It's different for every artist, so yeah.
Has anyone ever seen your work and said, that's me?
Yes.
You took my picture?
Yes.
Really?
Nobody's gotten angry at me yet or sued me. But yes, they can, usually they can recognize themselves. Which isn't necessarily important either. I guess if I painted them in a certain way and I still liked that it evoked what I wanted it to evoke or communicated what I wanted it to communicate, I guess it wouldn't necessarily be an awful thing if it didn't exactly look like them. But yeah, people have definitely said that.
So when you're just walking around the Twin Cities or at Como or wherever, you take pictures of people?
Sometimes. If I find that, or I see that thing that's attracting me, I spent a long time in school trying to figure out how to describe that thing, and I still don't know how. But yeah, I will. It'll be random times. Yeah.
So of the painting here, are most of the people you know, or are many of us here?
Yeah, I do know all of them except for the one wider one there. She got the green shirt on twice, I guess. And then the one right to the right of it, where we see her back. Those were strangers that I did see while I was, well, one I was in church, obviously, and then the other one I was walking around and took some photos. Yeah. But yeah, it's an interesting relationship that it's different when I do know the person in the painting than when I don't, and I have to be careful, right? Because I'm probably thinking about a lot more things with a person that I know than with somebody I don't know, so I have to be careful that what I'm actually visibly painting or showing is worth it, and it's not just like these thoughts that I'm having in my head and I think that that's what it's portraying. Does that make sense? Come up with more words later for you. Anything else? Thank you so much for joining me.